What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle was a carefully crafted performance? What if the smiling humanitarian, the Duchess of Sussex, the woman who claimed to fight for justice and kindness, was really hiding an ambition so sharp, so relentless, that even her own allies couldn't ignore it? That's the question that millions of viewers were left asking after a shocking live television moment where two of the most outspoken commentators in America, Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens, dropped a truth bomb that no one expected. They didn't just criticize Megyn. They accused her of something far darker, of being a calculated gold digger, of marrying Prince Harry not for love, but for what he represented: fame, fortune, and opportunities. Think about that for a second. In a world obsessed with fairy tales, Meghan Markle was supposed to be the embodiment of the modern Cinderella story. A hardworking actress who struggled her way up from obscurity, who found her prince, literally, and lived happily ever after. But what happens when the fairy tale begins to look more like a con job? What happens when people start asking, was Megyn in it for the man, or was she in it for the crown? And more importantly, why are these questions resurfacing now, years after the so-called royal wedding of the century? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. This is where the story gets unsettling. Because the accusations weren't whispered in gossip blogs or whispered in hushed tones at cocktail parties. They were broadcast in front of millions, live, unfiltered, and the words chosen weren't casual insults. They were sharp, they were precise, and they struck right at the heart of Megyn's carefully constructed image. But before we dive into what exactly was said, let's step back for a moment. Let's examine why Meghan Markle, out of all the figures in modern celebrity culture, continues to stir this level of controversy. Why do people either see her as a victim of an ancient, cruel institution, or as the manipulative mastermind who infiltrated it? Because that, right there, is the paradox that keeps audiences hooked. Meghan Markle isn't just a duchess. She isn't just a former actress. She's a symbol, a lightning rod. And symbols like her don't get accused of being gold diggers lightly. Now, let's paint the picture. You're sitting at home, scrolling through channels, and you stumble upon Megyn Kelly's broadcast. Suddenly, the conversation shifts. Candace Owens, never one to bite her tongue, is fired up. Her voice sharp, her tone uncompromising. She lays into Megyn with the kind of boldness that makes people shift in their seats. She says Megyn used Harry. She says Megyn saw him as her ticket. She says Megyn played the long game. Then, without missing a beat, Megyn Kelly nods and adds her own devastating commentary. She agrees. She amplifies. And together, the two women create a narrative that doesn't just sting, it burns. But here's the twist. For every viewer gasping in agreement, another is shaking their head, furious at the suggestion. How dare they accuse Megyn of such a thing? How dare they undermine a marriage that Megyn and Harry insist is built on love and trust? That's the genius of this moment. It wasn't just an attack. It was a spark that reignited one of the most controversial debates of the decade. Let me ask you directly. Do you believe Megyn fell in love with Harry for who he was, or for what he was? Be honest. Because answering that question forces you to confront a darker side of the fairy tale, one that doesn't sit neatly in glossy magazine spreads. And let's not forget the stakes. This isn't just about Megyn and Harry's marriage. This is about reputation. This is about influence. This is about the legacy of the monarchy itself. Because if Megyn is truly what Kelly and Owens accuse her of being, then the royal family wasn't just manipulated. It was infiltrated. And that idea, that an actress from Hollywood outplayed centuries of royal tradition, is as scandalous as it gets. The irony? Megyn built her brand on authenticity, on vulnerability, on telling her truth. And yet, critics like Kelly and Owens are saying that her truth was nothing more than a screenplay, a role she perfected to capture the world's attention. If that's true, then Meghan Markle didn't just play the role of a duchess. She became the greatest actress of her career. Think of the contradictions we've seen. Megyn presenting herself as shy and naive, yet orchestrating high-profile photo ops with paparazzi. Megyn claiming she wanted privacy, yet signing multi-million-dollar Netflix deals. Megyn saying she wanted to live quietly in California, yet repeatedly placing herself back into the headlines. Do those actions sound like someone escaping the spotlight, or someone addicted to it? This is where Kelly and Owens' accusations cut deep, because they tapped into a truth that many people were already whispering, that Megyn isn't the victim, that Megyn isn't the outsider crushed by the institution, that Megyn is, instead, the architect of her own story, and that Harry, willingly or not, became her prop. Let's get real for a moment. We've seen this story before. The ambitious outsider, the powerful man, the whirlwind romance. And often, behind the glamorous smiles and public appearances, there's a cold calculation. History is littered with examples. Women and men who climbed through marriages, who leveraged love into power, who used relationships as stepping stones. But here's the uncomfortable truth. When Megyn is accused of this, people don't want to believe it. They want the fairy tale. They need the fairy tale. And yet, when the cracks appear, when the inconsistencies pile up, suddenly, the fairy tale feels less like destiny and more like strategy. That's exactly what made this live TV takedown so explosive. It wasn't just that Megyn was being called out. It was that she was being stripped of her story, her narrative, and her carefully polished brand, right in front of millions. Let's not ignore the emotional undercurrent here either. Prince Harry is not just any man. He's Diana's son, the boy who walked behind his mother's coffin, the young prince who grew up under a shadow of trauma. To many, Harry is vulnerable, sensitive, and when critics accuse Megyn of targeting him, of exploiting those vulnerabilities, it feels less like gossip and more like betrayal. A betrayal not just of Harry, but of Diana's memory. Doesn't that sting? Doesn't that make you wonder what really drove Megyn's choices? But here's where things get even darker. Because if Megyn really did pursue Harry with calculated intent, then it means every tear shed, every interview given, every claim of victimhood might have been part of a larger performance. And if that's true, then Megyn didn't just fool Harry. She fooled the world. Pause for a second. Imagine you're Megyn, watching this unfold on TV. Two of the most recognizable conservative voices in America calling you out, labeling you, reducing your marriage to a strategy. Do you fight back? Do you stay silent? Because silence can be powerful, but silence can also look like guilt. And Megyn knows this better than anyone. Here's where the timing becomes crucial. Why now? Why are Kelly and Owens making this case in this moment? Because Megyn's brand is fragile. The Netflix deals are faltering. The Spotify deal collapsed. Public opinion is shifting. And just when Megyn thought she was reclaiming her narrative, this accusation drags her right back into the mud. That's not a coincidence. That's strategy. And for you, the audience, that creates tension. It creates drama. Because you're not just watching Megyn's story, you're participating in it. Every time you take a side, every time you debate her motives, you feed the very narrative she thrives on. But let's be clear, this isn't the end of the story. This is just the opening shot. Because what Kelly and Owens said was more than an opinion. It was an unveiling. And once something is unveiled, you can't unsee it. The only question left is, what happens when we pull the thread further? What comes to light when we examine Megyn's past, her contradictions, her calculated moves, step by step? Because if Kelly and Owens are right, then this live TV takedown was not just a scandal. It was the key to unlocking Megyn's darkest secret. And trust me, what comes next will change everything, and no one saw it coming. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. And Meghan Markle never saw it coming. On live television, in front of millions of viewers, Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens did what few have dared to do. They ripped away the glossy royal façade and accused Megyn of the one thing she has spent her entire public life trying to escape, being a calculated gold digger. Not just a woman in love, not just a duchess who struggled against tradition, but a strategist, a woman who used Prince Harry as her golden ticket to global fame. Picture it. The cameras are rolling, the lights blazing, the audience holding its breath. Candace Owens leans forward, eyes narrowing, and delivers a line that cuts sharper than a knife. Meghan Markle didn't marry Harry for love. She married him for opportunity. The crowd shifts. Some gasp, some nod, others recoil. But the conversation is no longer the same. In that moment, the fairy tale cracked. Why does this matter? Because this isn't just tabloid chatter. This is a declaration made in prime time, amplified across every platform, forcing people to confront the uncomfortable question they've whispered for years but rarely dared to say aloud. Did Megyn marry Harry for him? or for what he represented. And here's the kicker. When Megyn Kelly adds her voice to the fire, she doesn't just agree. She expands. She paints Megyn as a master of performance, someone who has played the world like an audience, curating her every move, every smile, every tear. Kelly doesn't call Megyn a gold digger outright. She calls her an actress who never stopped acting. And in some ways, isn't that accusation even worse? Let me ask you, have you ever met someone who seemed too polished, too rehearsed, as if every line out of their mouth had been tested and approved before it left their lips? That's the image Kelly and Owens cast of Megyn. Not the relatable humanitarian she wants us to see, but the calculating performer who knew exactly how to seize the moment and exactly how to position herself beside a prince whose vulnerabilities were all too visible. Think back to the royal wedding. The flowers, the music, the vows. Millions of viewers around the globe shedding tears, convinced they were witnessing history. But if Kelly and Owens are right, then that ceremony wasn't the climax of a love story. It was the opening act of a larger plan. Doesn't that change how you see it? And the signs were there all along. Megyn wasn't an unknown, stumbling into Harry's world by chance. She was a woman with connections, ambition, and a history of aligning herself with powerful figures. She wasn't plucked from obscurity. She maneuvered her way into opportunity. Isn't that what gold diggers do best? They don't beg for riches. They place themselves in the right place, at the right time, with the right person. But let's not oversimplify this. Megyn isn't just accused of wanting money. If it were only about wealth, there are dozens of billionaires she could have pursued. No, this accusation runs deeper. Megyn wanted the crown without wearing it. She wanted the global stage, the titles, the prestige, and she found it all in Harry. That's what makes this revelation so powerful. It reframes everything we've been told. The build-up to this accusation isn't random. It's years of contradictions stacking up like a house of cards. Megyn asking for privacy, while simultaneously orchestrating high-profile media deals. Megyn criticizing the monarchy, while clinging to the Duchess title that gives her relevance. Megyn insisting she's misunderstood, while constantly putting herself back in the spotlight. Here's the irony that Kelly and Owens hammered home. Megyn wanted us to see her as a victim, but every move suggests she was in control all along. Every tearful interview, every carefully chosen photo, every narrative of struggle, it wasn't vulnerability. It was branding. And the brand was working, until critics like Kelly and Owens forced us to question it. So let's peel this back further. Imagine you're Harry, a man scarred by tragedy, by the relentless press, by a childhood under the microscope. A man desperate for love, for understanding, for a woman who could shield him from the world. And then comes Megyn, beautiful, charming, saying all the right words. Is it any wonder Harry fell? But the deeper question is, was Megyn falling too, or was she climbing? That's the heart of this scandal. That's why it matters. Because if Megyn married Harry for what he symbolized, not for who he was, then this isn't a love story. It's a transaction. And if the transaction is true, then every time Megyn cries foul about being misunderstood, every time she claims she was the outsider crushed by an institution, it becomes harder and harder to believe. Here's where things turn electric. Kelly and Owens didn't stop at labeling Megyn. They exposed the consequences. They asked what this means for Harry, for the monarchy, for Meghan's children, for the entire institution she walked into. They forced viewers to ask, what happens to a marriage built on ambition rather than love? And that question isn't going away anytime soon. But why risk saying it on live television? Why risk the backlash? Because the evidence, they argue, has been staring us in the face all along. And it's time people stop pretending otherwise. Still, as explosive as this was, it's only the beginning. Because if you really want to understand Meghan's dark secret, you can't stop with one accusation. You have to go back. Back to her roots. Back to her career. Back to the choices that shaped her. Only then will the full picture come into focus. And that's exactly where we're headed next. Because the live TV explosion was shocking. But the story of Meghan's rise from Hollywood outsider to royal bride holds the clues to why this accusation may carry more truth than anyone wants to admit. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It wasn't luck. It wasn't chance. And it certainly wasn't fate. At least, that's what Meghan Markle's critics would have you believe. When you peel back the glittering layers of the royal wedding, the diamond tiara, the horse-drawn carriage, and the endless headlines proclaiming the modern fairy tale. Another narrative begins to emerge, one far more calculated. Meghan's rise from a struggling Hollywood actress to the Duchess of Sussex wasn't an overnight miracle. It was a long, winding climb built on ambition, connections, and timing. So let's rewind. Long before the world knew her name, Meghan was hustling. She wasn't born into wealth or privilege. She wasn't guaranteed a role on television. She fought for scraps in an industry that chews people up and spits them out. Small roles on shows like CSI, Deal or No Deal, and Suits. Each step forward was another brick in the foundation of her self-made empire. Admirable, right? But behind every role, every networking event, every strategic friendship, there was one constant. Meghan wasn't content with being ordinary. She wanted more. Here's the question you need to ask yourself. How does a woman who wasn't even a household name in Hollywood end up on the world's most watched wedding stage, standing next to the son of Diana, Princess of Wales? Is that just destiny, or was it design? Insiders whisper that Meghan always had her eye on something bigger than Hollywood, that she knew her looks, her charm, and her determination could take her further than bit parts on cable television, that she wasn't just waiting for her big break. She was engineering it. And then came Suits. Meghan's role as Rachel Zane gave her visibility. Not A-list fame, but enough to get invited into the right rooms. Enough to get photographed. Enough to start shaping a public image. It was during this period that Meghan cultivated not just her career, but her persona. She launched her lifestyle blog, The Tig, positioning herself as a tastemaker, a woman of culture, a voice worth listening to. She wasn't just an actress anymore. She was building a brand. And let's be clear, The Tig wasn't just a blog. It was a portfolio, a carefully curated showcase of Meghan's intellect, her humanitarian values, her global interests. In hindsight, it looks less like a passion project and more like a blueprint for her future royal role. Now here's where it gets interesting. Meghan didn't just network in Hollywood. She networked internationally. She mingled with diplomats, fashion elites, and wealthy philanthropists. She placed herself in circles far above the average cable actress. It wasn't random, it was strategy. She was building bridges to power, one dinner party at a time. So by the time she crossed paths with Prince Harry, was she just a lucky actress who happened to stumble into royal love? Or was she a woman who had been preparing for the role of her life all along? Let's not forget, Meghan herself has admitted that she didn't know much about Harry before they met. But does that claim hold up? This is the same woman who was deeply embedded in social media, who wrote extensively about lifestyle trends, and who moved in circles where royalty was discussed constantly. The idea that she didn't know who Harry was has always raised eyebrows. And now, after Kelly and Owens' accusations, it looks less like innocence and more like clever spin. Think of the timing. Meghan's career in Suits was steady but not groundbreaking. The Tig was popular but not world-changing. She was approaching her late 30s, a point where Hollywood often turns cold toward actresses. And then, almost like a plot twist in a screenplay, she meets Prince Harry, the Bachelor Prince, the man known for his wild youth, his heartbreak, his desperate search for meaning. A man carrying both the weight of his mother's legacy and the vulnerability of someone scarred by tragedy. If you were Meghan, wouldn't you see that as the role of a lifetime? Here's another layer. Friends from Meghan's past have described her as laser-focused. They say she knew what she wanted and went after it relentlessly. Relationships, opportunities, friendships. Meghan wasn't careless. She was deliberate. That quality made her successful in Hollywood. But what happens when that same drive is applied to the royal family? And yet, to millions watching, the wedding looked like destiny. The world swooned. The headlines screamed that love had conquered all. But as Candace Owens bluntly pointed out, what if love wasn't the only motivator? What if, beneath the veil and the vows, there was calculation? Let me ask you this. Have you ever known someone who could play two roles at once? Someone who smiles sweetly in public, but behind closed doors is calculating their every move? That's the double image critics say Megyn embodies. The starry-eyed bride on one hand, the relentless strategist on the other. This is why the live TV takedown hit so hard. Because it didn't just accuse Megyn of being opportunistic, it reframed her entire rise. It suggested that Megyn didn't just happen to meet Harry. She positioned herself for it. That her climb from Hollywood outsider to royal bride wasn't romance. It was ambition disguised as love. And here's the part that makes people squirm. If this is true, then Megyn didn't just marry a man. She infiltrated an institution. She leveraged centuries of royal history to elevate her own brand. And in doing so, she may have played the most high-stakes role of her career. But what if I told you that Megyn's path to Harry wasn't as organic as she claims? That the meeting wasn't just chance, but perhaps part of a carefully orchestrated introduction? Because when you dig deeper into how they actually met, the cracks in the fairy tale grow wider. And what we uncover next could shatter the love story Megyn has fought so hard to protect. But the truth of her intentions may be even more shocking than her methods. It all started with a blind date. At least, that's the official story. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were supposedly introduced by a mutual friend, set up casually, like any other couple might meet through their social circles. That's the fairy tale version, two people, worlds apart, brought together by fate. But if we've learned anything from watching Megyn's rise, it's this. Nothing in her life has ever been quite as casual as it seems. Here's the first red flag. Megyn has claimed repeatedly that she didn't know much about Harry before their date. She painted herself as the wide-eyed American actress, unfamiliar with the intricacies of the British monarchy and utterly surprised by the prince sitting across from her. But ask yourself, is that believable? This is the same Megyn who was active on social media, who ran a blog about culture, lifestyle, and global trends, and who lived in an era where Harry was one of the most eligible bachelors on the planet. Doesn't that sound more like a crafted narrative than the whole truth? Critics argue that Megyn knew exactly who Harry was before she ever shook his hand. There are whispers that she had spoken with mutual acquaintances about him, that she had researched him, and that she knew he was vulnerable, lonely, searching for meaning, desperate for connection. In other words, he was the perfect target for someone ambitious enough to recognize the opportunity. Let's look at timing again. By 2016, Megyn was nearing the end of her Suits contract. She wasn't an A-lister, but she had some visibility. She was approaching her late 30s in an industry obsessed with youth. Her lifestyle blog, The Tig, was gaining traction but hadn't reached mass success. She was on the edge of something, but not quite breaking through. And then, suddenly, she meets Harry. The narrative writes itself, a Hollywood actress turned duchess, her life elevated overnight by the kind of marriage that captures the world's attention. And yet, was it really so sudden? Or was it the culmination of years of positioning, of placing herself in the right circles, of befriending the right people? Remember, Megyn was already moving in elite social circles before she met Harry. She attended high-profile charity galas, traveled internationally, mingled with influential figures. She wasn't a random outsider stumbling into royalty. She was a woman who knew how to climb. Here's where things get even more unsettling. Some insiders suggest that Megyn wasn't just introduced to Harry randomly, that the so-called mutual friend may have been less of a Cupid and more of a carefully chosen connection. After all, in the world of high society, introductions aren't accidents. They're arrangements. And Megyn, with her eye for opportunity, would have known exactly how valuable an introduction to Harry could be. Let me ask you directly, do you believe Megyn's story that she barely knew who Harry was? Or do you think it's more likely that she played innocent while quietly preparing herself to win him over? Because that difference changes everything. One paints Megyn as a hopeless romantic. The other paints her as a master strategist. Think about Harry for a moment. He wasn't the secure, confident man of the tabloids. He was a prince scarred by his mother's death, resentful of the press, distrustful of institutions, and, at times, openly rebellious. He was searching for stability, for someone who could understand him. Megyn presented herself as exactly that. Compassionate, nurturing, independent, but also willing to step into the chaos of his world. Was that compatibility, or was that performance? And remember how quickly things escalated. Within months of their relationship going public, Harry was releasing official statements demanding privacy, chastising the press for intruding into Meghan's life. Think about that. Meghan wasn't even fully in the royal circle yet, and already Harry was bending the rules of palace protocol to protect her. Already he was breaking tradition, shifting his loyalties, and placing her needs above the monarchy's expectations. If Meghan's goal was to secure his devotion, she accomplished it almost immediately. Doesn't that feel deliberate? Then came the whirlwind romance. Exotic vacations, lavish trips, media coverage that treated Meghan like royalty before she even had the title. Every step of the way, Meghan seemed to know how to present herself. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't awkward. She was polished, poised, ready for the cameras. As if she had rehearsed for this role her entire life. And maybe she had. Because when Candace Owens calls Meghan a gold digger, she's not just throwing out an insult. She's pointing to a pattern. The pattern of a woman who didn't just stumble into love, but leveraged it. Who didn't just meet a prince, but secured one. And the swiftness of Meghan and Harry's courtship, the engagement, the wedding, only fuels the suspicion. Was it love at first sight? Or was it Meghan locking down her position before questions could be asked? Here's something else to consider. Meghan's past relationships. She was previously married to Trevor Engelson, a Hollywood producer. That marriage ended abruptly, and Meghan's split from Trevor left him blindsided. Friends of his later said that Meghan simply moved on when she felt he couldn't elevate her further. Harsh, perhaps, but consistent with the accusations we're seeing now? Absolutely. So ask yourself, is it really so outlandish to suggest that Meghan's relationship with Harry followed a similar pattern? That once she saw the opportunity, she pursued it with the same intensity she had applied to her career? This isn't just speculation. This is about recognizing a pattern of behavior, a series of choices that, when viewed together, suggest intent. And intent changes everything. If Meghan intended to marry Harry for the doors he could open, then her entire narrative collapses. The fairy tale dissolves into strategy. The romance turns into a transaction. But here's the real twist. Even if Meghan did target Harry, even if she did see him as her ticket to a new life, that doesn't mean she doesn't care for him now. That's the paradox. You can pursue opportunity and still develop genuine feelings. But when your entire reputation is built on authenticity, when you've sworn to the world that your love is pure, even a hint of opportunism can destroy it. And that's why this accusation cuts so deep. It isn't just about Meghan's marriage. It's about her credibility, her brand, her legacy. Because if Meghan didn't marry Harry out of love alone, then what else has she misled us about? But what's even more fascinating is that Meghan may have underestimated just how transparent her moves looked to outsiders. And the people who watched her rise most closely weren't the royal family. They were her peers in Hollywood. And when Hollywood insiders began to speak, the image Meghan had built started to unravel piece by piece. But the truth of her intentions may be even more shocking than her methods. She wanted the crown, but not the weight of it. She wanted the lifestyle, but not the duty. And if you look closely at Meghan Markle's choices after she secured Harry, the picture that emerges is chillingly clear. Fame, fortune, and endless opportunities were always the true prize. Let's strip away the romance for a moment. What exactly did Meghan gain when she married Prince Harry? Access to one of the most famous families in the world, a duchess title, a seat at the most exclusive tables, invitations to global events, brand power worth millions. Every door that might have been closed to a middling actress suddenly swung open. And the cost? Walking into a family she claimed was toxic, oppressive, and outdated. But here's the contradiction. If Meghan truly despised the monarchy, why marry into it in the first place? Was it for love? Or was it because marrying Harry instantly elevated her from cable TV actress to international superstar? Think about it. Before Meghan, Harry dated women like Chelsea Davy and Cressida Bonas. Both from privileged backgrounds, both reluctant to marry into the firm. They knew the burden of duty. They stepped away. Meghan did the opposite. She leaned in. She embraced the cameras, the glamour, the fairy tale. At least at first. Doesn't that suggest her motives were different? Candace Owens called it out bluntly. Meghan didn't just fall in love with Harry. She saw in him the ultimate jackpot. A prince with global recognition, wounded enough to be swayed, and rebellious enough to walk away from the palace for her. To Candace, Meghan's marriage wasn't a love story. It was a business transaction. Megyn Kelly added another layer. She argued that Meghan never stopped being an actress, that every gesture, every interview, every public appearance was part of an ongoing performance. And what was the role? The role of a duchess who, while supposedly rejecting the trappings of royalty, somehow managed to monetize them at every turn. Let's look at the evidence. Within months of leaving royal duties, Meghan and Harry signed multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. Their celebrity status, born from the monarchy, became their brand. Meghan landed a cover with The Cut, gave major interviews, and positioned herself as a cultural thought leader. Would any of that have been possible without Harry's title attached to her name? Without the royal connection, would Spotify or Netflix have written those checks? Ask yourself, if Meghan wanted privacy, why move to California and set up shop in Hollywood, the epicenter of fame and exposure? Why chase deals that required her to tell her story over and over again? Isn't that the opposite of privacy? Unless, of course, privacy was never the goal. Unless it was always about control. Control of the narrative. Control of the brand. Control of the opportunities that come with being not just Meghan Markle, but Megyn, Duchess of Sussex. And here's the irony. Meghan positioned herself as a victim of the crown, but her value outside of it is entirely tied to that crown. Without Harry, she's a former actress from Suits. With Harry, she's global news. That dependency is what makes the gold digger accusation so damning. Because it suggests Meghan didn't just marry Harry. She married what he represented, and then monetized it. But let's not pretend this was effortless. Meghan knew how to play the role of the sympathetic outsider. Remember the Oprah interview? The carefully chosen words, the revelations about mental health, the tearful moments? Millions sympathized with her. But critics argue it was another act. Another scene in a screenplay Meghan had been writing for years. One that framed her as both victim and victor, crushed by the monarchy, but thriving on her own terms. Now, here's where the story twists again. Harry sacrificed everything, his home, his family, his military ties, to follow Meghan. He gave up centuries of tradition. He cut himself loose from the very institution that defined him. And what did Meghan gain? Freedom, money, a platform bigger than she ever could have imagined. For Harry, it was loss. For Meghan, it was profit. That imbalance doesn't look like romance. It looks like strategy. And that's what keeps people uneasy. Love stories are supposed to be about mutual sacrifice, mutual growth, mutual gain. But in Meghan and Harry's case, the scales seem tilted. Harry gave up his world. Meghan expanded hers. Isn't that exactly what Kelly and Owens were getting at? Here's something that stings even more. Meghan often portrays herself as someone who was naive to royal life, who stumbled into a system she didn't understand. But how naive can you be when you're orchestrating paparazzi photos before your engagement is even public? How naive can you be when you've already curated your image as a humanitarian, a global citizen, a voice for change? That's not innocence. That's preparation. And if Meghan was prepared, if she knew exactly how to use her new role to maximize her influence, then maybe Owens and Kelly weren't being cruel. Maybe they were being honest. But the most devastating point they made wasn't about Meghan herself. It was about Harry. Because if Meghan married Harry for opportunity, then what does that make him? A man deeply in love, or a pawn in someone else's game? And that question doesn't just haunt Harry. It haunts us too, because it forces us to reconsider everything we've seen. Every public kiss, every joint interview, every claim of us against the world. Was it authentic, or was it staged? The truth is, Meghan's pursuit of fame and opportunity didn't stop at the wedding. It only accelerated. And the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes that the accusations made on live TV weren't a random attack. They were the natural conclusion of years of contradictions, choices, and patterns that Meghan herself set in motion. But here's the twist. If Meghan really is a master strategist, then every accusation, every scandal, every criticism might actually feed her plan. Because whether you love her or hate her, one thing is undeniable. You can't stop talking about her. And that's the dark genius of Meghan Markle. But if Candace Owens' words were brutal, Megyn Kelly's next revelation would cut even deeper. And the patterns Meghan thought were invisible were suddenly exposed. It was the kind of television moment that made viewers sit up straighter in their chairs. Candace Owens had already dropped her bombshell, calling Meghan Markle a gold digger who saw Harry as a walking opportunity rather than a partner. But just when you thought the air couldn't get thicker, Megyn Kelly leaned forward and delivered her own devastating blow. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to exaggerate. Her weapon was precision, and it landed with surgical impact. "She's still acting," Megyn declared, her tone sharp but measured. "Every public appearance, every interview, every tear, it's all part of the performance." Meghan Markle never stopped being an actress. The difference is, now her audience is global. The studio went silent for a heartbeat, and then the reactions poured in: gasps, applause, disbelief. It was a line that hit like a sledgehammer, not because it was loud, but because it rang true. Suddenly, the fairy tale wasn't just questioned, it was dismantled. Think about what Megyn was saying here. It wasn't simply that Megyn was ambitious. It wasn't simply that she wanted opportunities. It was that Megyn's very identity, the woman the world thought they knew, wasn't real. That every glimpse we'd seen of her, from the smiling duchess to the grieving daughter-in-law, was staged, scripted, performed. Let me ask you this. Have you ever watched someone cry and felt, deep down, that the tears weren't authentic? That something about the timing, the delivery, felt rehearsed? That's exactly what Kelly was suggesting, that Megyn's biggest role wasn't on Suits, but in her own life story. And when you revisit Megyn's public appearances with this lens, things begin to look very different. The Oprah interview, the podcast soundbites, the magazine covers where she stares wistfully into the distance, speaking about struggle and triumph. Each of them, critics argue, looks less like spontaneous moments and more like carefully directed scenes. Kelly pointed to the contradictions. Megyn saying she wanted privacy, then signing a Netflix deal. Megyn decrying the toxicity of the spotlight, then granting magazine interviews about her struggles. Megyn claiming she was silenced, while becoming one of the most amplified voices in modern media. Does that sound like a victim, or like a performer who mastered the art of playing one role while secretly preparing for the next? This is where the accusation cut deepest. Because performance means intent. It means Megyn wasn't simply swept along by circumstance, she was controlling it. And if that's true, then Megyn wasn't the target of cruelty, as she claims. She was the architect of her own spectacle. The irony is almost poetic. Megyn once said in an interview, "I've always tried to live authentically, to speak my truth. But authenticity doesn't require staging paparazzi photos before your engagement. It doesn't require launching a lifestyle blog to showcase how relatable you are while mingling with elites. Authenticity is messy, raw, unpolished." Megyn's life, in contrast, looks polished to perfection. Doesn't that suggest performance, not honesty? And here's the genius of Kelly's framing. She didn't just call Megyn an opportunist. She reframed Megyn's entire existence as an act. If you believe Megyn, then Megyn isn't just ambitious, she's deceptive. She isn't just calculating, she's duplicitous. That's not just character critique. That's character assassination. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. Performance, when done well, convinces. And Megyn has convinced millions. From Hollywood elites to social justice activists, she has sold her story as one of resilience and empowerment. If it is indeed an act, then Meghan Markle may be one of the greatest performers of her time. But performances eventually end. And when they do, the audience starts to see the wires, the script, the cracks in the illusion. Kelly's words forced people to start looking for those cracks. Was Megyn's shy outsider persona a disguise for relentless ambition? Was her victim of the crown story a strategy to build a billion-dollar brand? And if so, what role does Harry play in this? Is he the co-star, or the unwitting supporting character in Megyn's greatest production? Let's not forget, Harry has always been vulnerable to narratives. He grew up resenting the press, mourning his mother, searching for belonging. When Megyn came along, she offered him exactly what he craved: love, understanding, and a chance to escape the suffocating royal machine. But if Megyn was acting, then Harry may have fallen not for the woman herself, but for the role she was playing. And that's where the accusation stings. Because if Megyn's love was a performance, then Harry wasn't just betrayed as a man. He was exploited as a symbol. Diana's son, the people's prince, used as the ultimate prop in Megyn's story. Can you imagine a harsher betrayal? Think back to that iconic balcony scene after the wedding. The royal family standing together, waving to the crowds. Meghan positioned perfectly beside Harry, smiling like she belonged. But look closer. Do you remember the stiffness in Princess Anne's stance? The way Camilla seemed to glance past Meghan rather than at her? Or the distance between Meghan and Kate, even when the cameras pushed them side by side? Those weren't accidents. Royals know how to perform unity. When unity isn't there, it's deliberate. And then there were the leaks. Palace insiders, speaking anonymously to the press, described Meghan as difficult, demanding, even bullying. Were these just smear campaigns? Or were they coded warnings from a family that recognized the storm they had let in? Critics argue the latter. Because while the palace rarely speaks openly, it communicates in whispers, in signals, in the controlled trickle of information. And those whispers about Meghan came fast. Here's the chilling part. The royals didn't need to shout. Their silence spoke louder. When Meghan cried in interviews about being unsupported, where was the palace statement defending her? When rumors of tension between Meghan and Kate spread, where was the united front? Compare that to how quickly the palace moved to protect the late Queen's reputation whenever it was questioned. The contrast is glaring. But it wasn't just silence. Watch the videos again. Charles's awkwardness in Meghan's presence. William's clipped interactions. Kate's polite but icy body language. These weren't the gestures of a family embracing a new member wholeheartedly. These were the gestures of a family keeping its guard up. Why? Because, as Kelly and Owens suggest, they may have seen what Harry couldn't. That Meghan's arrival wasn't just about love. It was about leverage. A woman who had spent her career mastering the art of performance was now at the center of the world's biggest stage. And if she could sway Harry, she could sway the narrative. Here's where it gets even more unsettling. Meghan herself may have revealed the truth without even realizing it. In multiple interviews, she framed herself as someone who didn't understand what royal life would be like. She claimed she didn't know she'd have to curtsy to the Queen. She insisted she didn't realize how rigid the monarchy's traditions were. At first, these statements painted her as naive, innocent, overwhelmed. But look at them again, through Kelly and Owens' lens. Do they sound like naivety, or do they sound like excuses? Because how could Meghan, a woman so adept at research, networking, and presentation, truly be ignorant of what marrying into the royal family entailed? Doesn't it make more sense that she knew exactly what she was walking into, but wanted to craft a narrative of victimhood later? That's the contradiction that keeps haunting her story. Meghan claims she didn't know. Yet she maneuvered seamlessly into the spotlight, leveraging her Duchess title for multi-million-dollar deals, global interviews, and endless attention. Does that sound like someone who stumbled into the monarchy blindly, or someone who knew the value of the role from the start? And if the palace recognized this, then their coldness makes sense. Their whispers, their subtle distance, their refusal to shield her, they weren't betrayals. They were warnings. Silent signals that Meghan's story wasn't what it seemed. But the most damning evidence doesn't come from a stiff wave or a distant glance. It comes from Meghan herself, from her own contradictions, from her own carefully chosen words that, when pieced together, reveal something darker than even the palace dared to admit. Because if Meghan's narrative unravels under her own testimony, then Kelly and Owens weren't just voicing suspicion. They were echoing a truth Meghan herself accidentally exposed. And once you hear it, you'll never see her the same way again. But the contradictions weren't even her darkest secret. It always comes back to the contradictions. Meghan Markle has made a career, some would say an empire, out of telling her truth. From glossy magazine interviews to televised confessions, she insists her story is authentic, raw, and vulnerable. But here's the problem. The more she talks, the more the cracks begin to show. And those cracks aren't small. They're fractures wide enough for critics like Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens to drive a truck through. Take the Oprah interview. It was supposed to be Meghan and Harry's defining moment, their chance to speak freely after leaving the monarchy. But instead of silencing critics, it only raised new questions. Meghan claimed she and Harry were secretly married 3 days before their televised wedding. The Archbishop of Canterbury later flatly denied it. So, was Meghan confused, or was she embellishing? She said she was silenced, unable to speak or defend herself while inside the palace. Yet multiple staff members have since revealed Megyn had a team of PR professionals working tirelessly to promote her image. Which version is true? The gag Duchess or the media-savvy strategist? And then there's the infamous Kate made me cry story. Megyn told Oprah that it was Kate, not her, who caused the tears before the royal wedding. But palace insiders pushed back, insisting it was Megyn's behavior that upset Kate. Two completely different accounts of the same event. One paints Megyn as the victim. The other paints her as the aggressor. Which one do you believe? Here's the chilling thought. If Megyn was willing to bend the truth about these details, what else might she have been willing to manipulate? Let's dig deeper. Megyn claimed she didn't research Harry before their first date. She wanted us to believe she knew little about him, that she was swept up by his charm. Yet in another interview, she admitted she looked up the royal family online to understand what she was getting into. So which is it? Was she a naive outsider, or a woman who did her homework? And then there's the privacy contradiction. Megyn and Harry said they left the UK to protect their personal lives, to live quietly, to shield their children. But within months, they were signing Netflix and Spotify deals, producing documentaries, and publishing tell-all memoirs. Privacy or profit? Doesn't that sound less like retreat and more like rebranding? Megyn Kelly called it Megyn's actress persona, and she wasn't exaggerating. Because these contradictions don't look like innocent mistakes. They look like rehearsed lines that didn't match up. They look like a script written for maximum sympathy and revised whenever the audience asked too many questions. Now let me ask you this. Have you ever caught someone in a lie? Maybe a small lie, one that didn't matter much. But once you noticed it, you started questioning everything else they said. That's exactly what's happening here. Every contradiction chips away at Megyn's credibility. Every conflicting detail makes people wonder, if she bent the truth here, what else has she fabricated? And then comes the most haunting part. Megyn's contradictions don't just expose her, they expose Harry too. Because if Megyn's story doesn't add up, then Harry has either been fooled or he's complicit. Either option is devastating. If Harry is fooled, he's the pawn of a master manipulator. If he's complicit, then he's sacrificing his own family's legacy to protect a performance. Critics argue this is why the palace stayed silent. Why issue rebuttals when Megyn's own contradictions will eventually unravel her story? Why fight openly when the inconsistencies are already eroding her credibility? The palace didn't need to wage war. They only had to wait. And waiting has paid off. Public sentiment is shifting. The Oprah interview, once hailed as groundbreaking, is now dissected for its half-truths. Megyn's podcast, Archetypes, collapsed after just one season, with Spotify executives mocking her lack of authenticity. The Netflix deal, once promising, is faltering under scrutiny. The brand of Meghan Markle, raw, authentic, unfiltered, is being eaten alive by the very contradictions she created. But here's the irony. Megyn's greatest strength, her ability to tell her truth, may also be her greatest weakness. Because once the truth starts to unravel, it doesn't stop. And what begins as a crack quickly becomes a collapse. And yet, as damning as these contradictions are, they still aren't the darkest part of Megyn's story. Because while her words may have exposed cracks, it was the whispers from her past, the colleagues, the friends, the Hollywood insiders, that delivered the most shocking revelations of all. When the people who knew Megyn before Harry started to talk, the narrative shifted from questionable to explosive. And what they revealed wasn't just inconvenient. It was devastating. Hollywood has long memories. And for Meghan Markle, those memories refused to fade. When Megyn entered the royal family, much of the world saw her as a fresh face, an outsider who brought modernity to an ancient institution. But in Hollywood, where Megyn had spent over a decade clawing her way up the ladder, people weren't so dazzled. They remembered her before the tiaras and titles. They remembered the actress hustling for roles, cultivating connections, and curating an image of sophistication through her blog, The Tig. And when they watched her step into Buckingham Palace, many weren't surprised. They whispered, "This is exactly who she's always been." One of the most consistent themes that emerges from Megyn's past is her ambition. Colleagues describe her as driven, relentless, and always thinking 3 moves ahead. Admirable qualities in the cutthroat world of acting. But when ambition spills into personal relationships, it raises different questions. Take her first marriage to Trevor Engelson. By all accounts, Trevor supported Meghan's career, helped her land auditions, and celebrated her role on Suits. But the end of their marriage was abrupt. Friends of Trevor later said Meghan simply mailed back the wedding rings when the relationship no longer fit into her trajectory. No warning, no discussion, just a clean cut. Sound familiar? Critics like Candace Owens seize on that story as proof that Meghan has always viewed relationships transactionally. If Trevor was a stepping stone in Hollywood, was Harry the stepping stone to global fame? Then there are the whispers from the Suits set. Cast members have publicly spoken kindly about Meghan, calling her professional and warm. But behind closed doors, others have hinted she was calculating, that she networked strategically, always aligning herself with those who could elevate her status. That even during her run on the show, she carried herself less like a supporting actress and more like someone destined for bigger stages. And then came the TIG. On the surface, it was a lifestyle blog, recipes, travel diaries, reflections on culture. But Hollywood insiders saw it differently. It was Meghan's branding machine. Through the TIG, she wasn't just an actress. She was an intellectual, a humanitarian, a tastemaker. The blog looked like a portfolio designed to attract attention from the kinds of circles Meghan ultimately wanted to enter. And doesn't that make sense, given where she ended up? Here's where it gets even darker. Some of Meghan's former friends, those she left behind as she climbed higher, began to speak up after she married Harry. They described a pattern. Meghan forming close bonds, leaning on people for support, then cutting them off once they no longer served a purpose. Social climbing, they called it. And when those stories resurfaced during her royal years, they added fuel to the fire lit by Kelly and Owens. Because if Meghan treated friends and colleagues as disposable, why would marriage be any different? Let's pause here. Have you ever known someone who seemed to reinvent themselves every time they entered a new social circle? Someone who left behind old friends, old habits, old identities, as if shedding skins? That's the image critics paint of Meghan Markle. The Hollywood striver who reinvented herself into a duchess, leaving a trail of discarded connections behind her. And perhaps the most telling part is how Hollywood reacted after Meghan married Harry. For many, it wasn't shock. It was validation. Meghan, the networker, the hustler, the strategist, they always knew she was aiming higher than television. The crown wasn't a surprise. It was the ultimate role. That's why Kelly and Owens' accusations resonate so deeply. They're not creating a new story. They're amplifying an old one. The whispers from Hollywood that Meghan's ambition wasn't new, that it was always there, lurking beneath the surface. And when you line up her past with her present, the pattern becomes difficult to ignore. But here's the twist. Hollywood insiders weren't just whispering about Meghan's ambition. Some hinted at something even more unsettling. That Meghan's pursuit of power wasn't just about her career. It was about crafting a legacy. About building a brand so massive that even the monarchy couldn't contain it. And if that's true, then Meghan's marriage to Harry wasn't just opportunistic. It was strategic on a scale that dwarfs even the boldest Hollywood power moves. Because Harry wasn't just a husband. He was the gateway to rewriting Meghan's story forever. But what if Meghan's story wasn't unique? What if, in fact, she fit into a centuries-old archetype that women, and men, have been accused of embodying time and time again? The gold digger archetype. And once you place Meghan into that frame, the comparisons are impossible to ignore. But Meghan's game wasn't just about gold. It was about something far bigger. Throughout history, society has had a word for women like Meghan Markle. A word both cruel and loaded. A word that carries judgment, suspicion, and scandal all at once. That word is gold digger. But let's be clear, being labeled a gold digger isn't just about money. It's about motives. It's about intent. And when Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens positioned Meghan in this archetype on live TV, they weren't just calling her greedy. They were accusing her of weaponizing relationships for personal gain, of turning love into leverage, of making marriage less about romance and more about strategy. Let's take a step back and look at the archetype itself. From Hollywood starlets of the 1930s to socialites of the 1980s, accusations of gold digging have followed ambitious women for centuries. Marilyn Monroe, Anna Nicole Smith, Wallis Simpson, the American divorcee who famously drew a British king away from his throne. Do you see the pattern? Women who dared to reach beyond their station were always accused of seducing powerful men for what they represented rather than who they were. And Meghan Markle, critics argue, fits neatly into that mold. Because when you place Meghan's story into this larger frame, it suddenly looks less like a modern fairy tale and more like history repeating itself. An actress from America, ambitious and charming, who falls into the orbit of a royal prince. A prince with deep vulnerabilities, desperate for love and loyalty. The perfect mark. The perfect opportunity. The perfect script. But here's where Meghan's story diverges from the archetype. Most so-called gold diggers were after wealth, after comfort, after stability. Meghan already had some degree of financial independence, thanks to Suits and her projects. Money wasn't her problem. What she wanted was bigger, fame, influence. A platform so vast that it would eclipse anything Hollywood could ever offer. And Harry provided that instantly. So Meghan's story doesn't just echo the gold digger archetype. It amplifies it. She didn't just marry into wealth. She married into history. Into an institution that gave her not just a title, but a megaphone to broadcast her brand to the entire world. And think about how seamlessly she played the role. At first, she embodied the loving wife, the gracious duchess, the bridge between tradition and modernity. The world celebrated her as a symbol of progress, a biracial American actress marrying into the most traditional monarchy in the world. For a moment, Meghan wasn't just a duchess. She was a global icon. But then, the cracks. The Oprah interview. The complaints about the palace. The endless contradictions. And suddenly, the fairy tale was being recast as a power move. Suddenly, Meghan wasn't the outsider crushed by the system. She was the strategist who used the system until it no longer served her. That's the genius and the danger of the gold digger narrative. Once it attaches to someone, it changes everything. Every smile looks calculated. Every tear looks rehearsed. Every move looks opportunistic. And when Kelly and Owens put that label on Meghan, they weren't just criticizing her. They were reframing her entire marriage as performance art. But here's the question you need to ask yourself. What if they're right? What if Meghan saw Harry not as her soulmate, but as her ticket? What if the most watched wedding of the century wasn't a love story, but a business deal disguised as one? The irony, of course, is brutal. Because while Meghan may have thought she was rewriting the royal fairy tale, critics argue she only proved that the archetype never dies. That society will always suspect women who climb too high, too fast, of digging for something other than love. And yet, Meghan's story has an even darker twist. Because if she truly embodied this archetype, then Harry himself wasn't just her partner. He was her prize. And what does it mean for a man, a prince no less, to realize that he wasn't chosen for who he was, but for what he represented? That's the heartbreak at the center of this scandal. And it's where Meghan's story crosses from ambition into tragedy. Because the moment Harry becomes the prize, the marriage becomes something else entirely. And this revelation left viewers gasping on live TV. He was Diana's son, the boy the world pitied as he walked behind his mother's coffin, his face etched with grief no child should ever bear. The spare to the heir, the soldier who fought in Afghanistan, the prince who once stumbled, rebelled, and made tabloid headlines for all the wrong reasons. Harry was all of those things. But above all, he was vulnerable. And for Meghan Markle, critics argue, that vulnerability made him the ultimate prize. Think about it. Harry wasn't just any bachelor. He was one of the most famous men alive. His name alone carried weight in every corner of the globe. He represented history, legacy, and immense cultural capital. To marry Harry wasn't just to marry a man. It was to inherit centuries of symbolism. And that's exactly why Candace Owens' words cut so sharply when she said Meghan saw Harry as her ticket. Because if Harry was the ticket, what does that make Meghan's love story? Let's explore this dynamic more deeply. Harry had always been the less confident brother, overshadowed by William, burdened by the trauma of his mother's death, and increasingly distrustful of the press. Meghan appeared at just the right time. She seemed to offer him what he craved: unconditional loyalty, understanding, and escape from the suffocating grip of royal life. But was that compatibility? Or was it calculation? Megyn Kelly suggested Meghan played to Harry's wounds. She mirrored his pain, amplified his grievances, and positioned herself as the only person who truly understood him. That kind of mirroring isn't random, it's deliberate. It builds trust quickly. It forges bonds that feel unbreakable. And in Harry's case, it